Okay, it's on.
Just waiting for it to. Cool. Got it.
Zoom's not working yet.
Is it? So I've
I
got
think I'm in
screen
the.
sharing.
You have to admit me or something?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, hi.
Hey. So yeah, I guess there's a lot to talk about. Or it feels like there's a lot to talk about. Um, I watched. I've just finished the video that you suggested. I watched How the World Changes, which I think I watched some time ago.
Uh-huh.
As well. So it was somewhat familiar, but I hadn't thought about it in a long time. I thought that was good, and uh, yeah, um, I get the feeling that it was written to be more accessible, so I don't feel like I had too many questions, particularly related to it. Um,
Oh, yeah, that wasn't the point. Um,
oh yeah, yeah,
the reason I thought of that was you seemed very, like, inspired. And inspired people often expect quick change or overestimate what's going to actually happen.
yep,
Like, some of the people who read Atlas Shrugged, like pre-release copies or right after it came out, thought this is going to change the whole country in a few weeks.
yep. I think
Um,
you particularly mentioned Peacock in the video.
yeah. Okay, that was in the video. Yeah, so that it's important to try to have a correct perspective in some ways about what's realistic and so on, I think. Because people get disappointed and disillusioned, and so it can be like a high and then a crash because it doesn't work out with the quote idealism of youth or whatever.
hmm Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with that feeling in the crash. Um, I think I've maybe been lucky in that, like the impact that BOI had, that being the first sort of thing where I think I properly sort of experienced this to, or at least to the degree that I did. Um, I've sort of been quite lucky in that it's been a very enduring sort of thing, and it's made a lot of things much easier afterwards because of that. So, I mean, the most recent example, the the evening when I emailed you about tutoring, um, it was like I felt quite like down at the time as such, but particularly with like that first week, and then that sort of at the end of the first week when I had a similar sort of um, down moment, and you suggested that I read the choice. It's been, I feel like, incredibly easy by comparison to most people to adjust to that. Like in that I ran into or I ran into my own limits where I didn't expect them to be, uh, in a way that I feel like would have been far more catastrophic if I didn't have the thinking tools that I already have. And so it was much easier to then embrace the ideas in the choice, which then has a bit of a positive feedback loop. Um, so one of the things I guess, uh, I do feel quite inspired, particularly yesterday. I had a lot of trouble sleeping yesterday night, or like calming myself down to actually end up sleeping. But I started to realize as well the I sent you some journal entries. I've got pages
Yeah.
6 to 7 on the screen at the moment. So uh, yeah, I'm starting to. I think I'm much better at seeing issues that I'm running into as I'm running into them. So here, this losing focus and racing ahead. And particularly, like the racing ahead is the thing that's worrying me at the moment, because I think that's usually what people do that ends up with them having the crash, if that makes sense. Like because they find some new idea, they get inspired, they race ahead to try and use it, and they don't understand it well enough. So not only can they not use it appropriately, but it's not like, even if they could try and implement it, that would be error prone, and there's going to be they're going to like run into those sort of limits, but not know how to deal with them, and then despair, which is the wrong answer, but it's the thing that happens.
Yeah, and a lot of times they quickly try to move on to teaching.
Mm. So, so this maybe is worth stopping on for a bit, or pausing on this topic, because like one of the ways that yesterday was really good was that I talked with a friend about goals, and particularly like we talked about his goals and breaking them down, and sort of like practiced and went into far more detail than I've done with myself, um, particularly because he had some longer term goals that I don't have particularly long term goals at the moment besides the projects I'm working on. So it's much easier for me to focus on the near term stuff, on this that we're doing. Um, I think that like so I think trying to re-express ideas is obviously good to understand them, but I feel like in terms of I'm far more aware of my limits in where to teach people, if that makes sense. Like this is a I feel like it's much easier to use that, like, because the goal stuff is really foundational to a lot of what we're doing. I can practice some other ideas, like using idea trees properly and things at the same time, but I'm not teaching that. I'm just focusing on like working on the goal stuff. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's like, it seems like it was good in that both of us felt very good afterwards. Um,
Was that the thing you streamed?
no, so the thing I streamed was um, just in the afternoon. Uh, Ben and Kip were in the Flux Discord voice chat thing, and we were talking a bit, and I didn't feel like amazingly productive. So I didn't want to, like, I didn't feel like I had the like creative energy left essentially to do stuff like work on the well, chapter 4. I haven't even still haven't finished the overview of the choice chapter 4. Um, and so I figured that I would like do something that's less uh I guess like requires less creative energy. And then
Yeah.
I was initially just going to start streaming to show Ben what I was doing and talk about um talk about some ideas that I was playing with, and like, yeah, something that wouldn't um I mean, it was definitely going too far too fast, and I realized as I was like at the beginning when I was explaining a few things about yes no in the tutorial on Wednesday, or our last tutorial rather, um that there was like I was running into some issues there. um but it just seemed like a good, like at least a somewhat productive thing to do if I didn't have the creative energy for more intense stuff. um but then the like offshoot of that then led into um like doing a lot more afterwards. I sort of had a few hours of downtime after that, and then uh, yeah, and then thought about journaling and started. Uh, well, I watched a little bit of Yes No, and then started journaling, and that sort of kicked off this heavily inspired period
Yeah,
to move
regarding
beyond.
the stream, how productive or good that kind of thing is depends a lot on what your goal is. Um, like if you just want to explore stuff and try it out and see what problems you run into, that's completely useful. And then, but if you're expecting like this is going to work, we're going to solve all the problems, this is going to be a final draft, then maybe it's not going to work and you're not spending your time very well. But it depends on what you're looking for from it and how you're approaching it and thinking of it.
Yeah, no, it was definitely more of a. I mean, I tried to, I guess, conveying in the title. I think it was Max and Ben talk about things while Max breaks down some ideas about Flux or something like that.
Yeah, that was
Um,
casual.
yeah, it was sort of, I guess, with the like a chit chat podcast sort of idea, atmosphere sort of thing. Yeah, that's really the most that it was meant to do. So it wasn't meant um, to be particularly like it wasn't meant to have much longevity necessarily. If it is useful into the future, that's nice, but it's not meant to be something to particularly like rely on or link back to.
Yeah. So do you want to continue with yes no stuff or talk about the journal or the choice or
So
something else?
the I think so. I've got like I brought this page up because one of the things that I like realized last night is I need to like in some ways slow down consumption a bit because I'm having too much of a reaction to it, and I need to focus on doing stuff like actually finishing like well chapter 4 review of the choice, but or outline, but also the entire book. Um, so I sort of feel like my biggest problem at the moment is mismanaging my time in that I've got these things that are related that I want to spend time on. Like yes and yes no is one of these. In that which is why I like was watching a bit yesterday. Um, so I do want to spend time on that, and my like immediate reaction is that I really want to spend time on that, but I feel like if I try to consume that too fast, then uh, yeah, that might end up being negative in that I don't finish practicing things. I don't like finish what I've been starting. Obviously, like it's not like we can, work effectively on the choice outline here, sort of thing. But I guess maybe one thing I do want to talk about today, it doesn't have to be now, but is yeah, this problem of managing uh sort of like as I've got like the list of things that I want to do or think about or write has sort of exploded, and I need an effective way to focus that. Um, yeah. So, like here, I've sort of
Yeah.
got like, yeah,
Regarding reading books or watching yes no or consuming things too fast, a big issue with that is whether you're going to actually go through it a second time or not. Because if you like go through it quickly and you miss a lot and then you go through it more thoroughly later, that's completely fine. But a lot of times when people do the quick pass, then the thorough pass never happens. So
mm,
you have to have some understanding of like, is this something I'm actually going to come back to? Is it important enough? Is for me a lot of the difference is how important it is and how good the author is. Because if they're not really great, I usually don't want to reread it.
yeah,
And you don't have to go into all the detail and everything. Like outlining the choice is good for outline practice, but that's probably a book you'll reread in a few years or something, and or you can review specific parts of. It doesn't seem like something where you have to get every detail right now. Like in terms of
mm,
priorities, I don't think understanding that book perfectly is super high priority.
yeah. It definitely, I mean, in terms of like the problem at the time when you suggested it, like that problem's definitely sort of gone away, but I don't want to. I guess I'm particularly worried about like abandoning it type thing, in that I think it's too important to abandon. Um, Maybe I need to set some like limits for myself on how much detail I go into and things like that. In that, if I try to do too much, then it takes too long, and there's not nearly as much benefit. Um, so if I,
Yeah, you have to some extent separate the two issues of are you reading it to learn about the book or are you practicing outlining? Because going through things in
mm,
detail is a very important skill, like in its own right. But you can practice that with many other things. Um,
yeah, okay.
so
So
it's like a two-part project, two purposes at the same time.
yeah. So I guess my thinking is I want to know about the book more than practice outlining on that book particularly. Um, so yeah, so I should probably diminish the important about. I think like I still want to do outlines, even if it's just as I go through or things like that, like to take notes and then maybe edit them later on for the outline. That might be a quicker way to do it. I also find I remember material better and I think I process it better when I am so like I was doing this with yes no yesterday. This is similar somewhat to um, BOI where I had like here I've got like timestamps watching yes no, and I tried to add uh, things like the actual time. I don't see where I was doing it here. Um, there's 9:20 p.m. there. But yeah, so like from that point, so from like 1450 to 19. Oh no, that was basically just straight. But they're like this period here of like 8 minutes of video, sort of the bottom half on this side and the top half on the right side. Um, that took like 20 minutes plus to go through because I would like every time I had an idea, I'd like pause it, write it down, step back, and then keep going from there. And so I feel like when I do that sort of process, which is quite similar to what I did with BOI, though I didn't write down nearly as much. I more sort of like internally monologued. Um, uh, that sort of thing is, I feel like if I do that, I'll get most of the benefit of like doing the outline type stuff. Um, yeah,
Yeah, taking some notes at all instead of none gets a lot of the memory benefits, I think. It's like a different style of engagement than just purely being a content consumer. And I think
yep,
shifting to that makes a pretty big difference for people. And then going into more detailed notes is more of a marginal benefit. Um, it definitely has benefits, but it's not as big of a shift as going from no notes to some notes.
yep. Okay, I think then what I'll do is I'll change my strategy with the choice to be a bit more like this, and that way, like because I ended up, we talked a little bit about how or I talked a little bit about how I was like jumping ahead, like going ahead of the outlining structures. Um, and it's been sort of disappointing to myself that I haven't been able to, like, I'm sort of blocking myself going any further, but I want to, keep reading past chapter 8. Um, so if I do this, I think that that's a good thing that satisfies both of or all my goals around the situation really, because the other goals like getting better at outlining and structuring ideas, we can obviously do with other things.
Yeah, related to that, on Gumroad I have notes on 2 different Peacock lecture courses, which you might want to look through those. They're just $1 each or two. But
Oh, cool.
the point is just like an example of note taking that I did, probably near the bottom.
Oh yeah, I know that like the
One of
featured
them is the
ones are the
grammar course. The other one is his it's about like
philosophy of
education. Yeah.
yeah, okay, I can see it. Philosophy of education and then grammar course. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so those just
Yeah.
have some examples of note taking I did while I was going through his courses. Um and then also if you look on Subscribestar, I posted some notes from my recent rereads of It's Not Luck and Critical Chain. They're not at all like comprehensive or outlining, they're just things I noted,
Yep.
like selections. So you might want to look at those both for the example and for gold rat stuff. Particularly It's Not Luck, which has some yes no related stuff that I noted in particular.
Um, there's a post titled "What was Gold Rat Missing Re Win Win and Social." Um, is
That's separate.
okay. So I'll just control F for critical chain, and it's not luck.
Yeah, that should work. And regarding going through 8 minutes of stuff in 20 minutes, I also do a start stop approach a lot. I don't like having to remember my ideas and keep them in my mind while listening to something or writing something or whatever. So I usually just stop and write them down immediately before I forget. Um,
Yep.
and I do this with email replies a lot as well. I reply to basically everything as I go along, and then usually I don't really have to edit anything based on later things changing the meaning like backwards. I have a
Yep.
pretty good sense of what to expect later, so it doesn't come up that often. But it can be an issue where you have to. Sometimes they foresee something and like deal with it later. So like the objection
Yeah.
you're making gets addressed later or something, so then you have to edit. But even if you have to change some of things, I still find it's worth it usually to write down thoughts as I go instead of like losing them.
Mm.
And because these are things that I usually don't really want to reread carefully. So I don't get like a second chance to think it through.
Yep. Yep. No, that makes sense. I suppose as well, it sort of occurs to me that uh, the quality of what you're reading depends on how much editing might be required. Um, like I find, yeah, if someone's less good at writing, then yeah, it's much harder to do that sort of thing. Um,
Yeah. When it's harder to figure out what they're talking about, sometimes I just don't have comments for a while and I have to skim around and figure it out.
yep.
Or you can
Okay,
make
cool.
very local comments like this is unclear given what I've read so far, but those can
Yes,
be
yep.
a bit boring.
Um, okay, so I feel like I've got a reasonable way to at least start approaching this almost like feeling of overwhelming volume of or breadth of stuff that I'm thinking about. Um, which is good. Um, I suppose I'll probably get faster at that and like able to make better notes as well. Which will be good. So uh yeah, if you'd like to, or I'd like to keep going with some yes no stuff. If you want to keep doing that, that was really, really good.
Okay.
So I think last time, oh, one thing that an idea that I had many years ago about maths and fallibility.
Yep.
Um, just I put it down here. Uh, I'm not sure I have mentioned it on FI ever. But yeah, we sort of like glossed over the sort of feels like there's a bit of a paradox type thing between the idea of like a mathematical proof and fallibility, and particularly because there's this idea of like certainty. Um,
Yeah. Hold on.
and
Remind me, have you
yep.
finished reading Fabric of Reality?
No, I've had
Yeah,
it for
so
a long time, and I
chapter
haven't yet.
10 is about math and fallibility.
Okay, so my idea is quite simple, I guess, in the scheme of things, which is that the big thing that's fallible in maths is, roughly speaking, like the claim that these axioms are relevant or like important for this particular thing or this system or whatever else that we're comparing things to.
Do you
So
mean bridging the
beyond
gap from abstract math to physical systems and reality in real situations?
pretty much, yep,
Yeah, that's one of David's points. I think it's in BOI briefly mentioned.
that might explain. Yeah, I'm not sure how much I can't think how much he talks about it in BOI, but that
Yeah,
would
Fabric
explain.
actually makes a different point primarily, which is that doing a proof is a physical process and you use physical objects like paper and pen, and your understanding of the nature of these objects and your control over them is fallible, and that makes the entire process fallible.
So it's like a sort of same idea as theory laden measurements and stuff. It's a theory laden proof, and the theories are all of these things about physics and symbols and information and computers and information processing and reading and etc. etc.
Yeah, persistence of graphite over time.
Yep.
Which is like the point about graphite is a bit pedantic, but it's still adequate to establish fallibility because that's a very strict technical point.
Well, it would definitely come into things if we discovered like early stuff from what do you call it? Like, 800,
Oh yeah,
uh,
old manuscripts
yeah, CE
dated.
sort of thing. Um, and it wouldn't be, no one would question, no one would claim that it's an arbitrary like thing to say at that point, I suspect.
Okay, so some of the things we went over were degree arguments versus decisive arguments. Weights, numbers, scores, amounts. Continuum versus digital. And so with continuum versus digital, I view it as two main categories. There's like the things that are approximately a real continuum, or the things that are approximately binary, like a small number of integers.
Yep.
Um, and then there's a middle ground, but so there's things like infinite integer, which is not a continuum, but it's for most purposes it might as well be when we're dealing with it. And it's the same with like very large numbers of integers. Like if there's a million possibilities, it's just too many to handle individually. Which is actually just the kind of thing you end up with when you take a continuum and round everything to the nearest 1 or 10 or whatever.
Yep.
And then there's an actual middle ground at, say, 100 things, where it's less clear. It kind of depends on what you're doing and how much work you're willing to put into it. But usually we stay away from the gray areas. They're not that common. Whereas both extremes are common.
Yes.
Binary or very small numbers are quite common, and also continuums are common.
Yep. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of the importance of reducing things to, yeah, things that are at the very least discrete chunks that are easy to identify. Um, and the role that like things like error correction can play in digital systems, or binary systems. Um, yeah, I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on things leading up to that. It gets a bit murkier once we start talking about applying it to compound goals, and I think, yeah, the many solutions and no solutions were the two things we got to at the end of last episode, which is
Yeah.
episode.
So the stuff I was just saying about the two ends are common and the middle's uncommon. That's very similar to the jump to universality, where
Yep, yep,
you have universal and you have very little and not much in the middle. So I think that's an interesting connection. The jump to universality is not quite understood well enough, so it's hard to know exactly why that connection is there or what's going on.
I think
Like,
it's
I don't think I
prob
have a full understanding.
it occurs to me as well that I think most people would, based on like the words and things like the connection between universality and infinities, um, the relationship is somewhat inverse in that if we try and represent goals as continuums, we're very limited, and when we try and represent them as smallest number of possible options, like a binary or a digital um, system, that's then when we get the
Right.
universal. Yeah. So that's a sort of interesting
Yeah, that
relationship.
we want to get away from infinity in this case, whereas with universality we want to move towards it.
Well, we get a different infinity, maybe is the like we're trading one infinity for another one, a less useful one for a more useful one.
But so with like a universal computer or a tool or something, we're trying to increase the repertoire, increase the number of things it does. Um, Whereas with the yes or no philosophy, we're trying to decrease the number of options and get it more manageable. There's an
Yep.
interesting reversal of direction there. Jump to universality, by the way, the concept of universality itself is underdefined. The stuff in BOI doesn't have a full explanation, and there's missing stuff there.
Yep. I did see your that was related to a book that a guy wrote, but the thing like if a oh I can't even
Oh,
remember the thing, but yeah, like if some x can do all y's or
yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, I know what that is. Yeah, but that, if you define universality that way that I came up with, then you run into the issue of which universalities are interesting. Like, you get too many of them, and only some
yeah,
are notable. You have to figure out, like, why some of them matter. Yeah, so it's, like, I came up with a generic definition that's not exactly broken, but it lacks focus. It doesn't draw our
yeah.
attention to the actual relatively small number of universality categories that we actually care about and think are important. So there's definitely something missing there. And yeah, David doesn't know either.
Hmm.
He might know like part of the answer, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't at least have a full answer, and it's not in his books. Okay, so one of the things I want to talk about with yes no is what the limits on it are and what the purpose of it, and sort of the big picture. It's a system for organizing thinking, and it does not take away the need for judgment and creativity. You can make mistakes, you're fallible, um, you can miss things. Like, it doesn't make thinking a mechanical process.
Hmm.
It doesn't make it trivial or anything like that. So I think sometimes people lose that context and then they have unrealistic expectations, like the decision chart should just tell them what to do and get rid of all the like squishy judgment calls entirely. It's not going to do that. It moves some of the judgment calls more into which goal should I have rather than um, a multiplicity of solutions for an unclear goal. We try to have a multiplicity of clear goals with clear solutions, which I think improves the situation and makes it easier to think. It helps you. It removes some common ways people screw up, but it's not perfect. It's not going to turn you into a god.
Yep.
So it's important when you're looking at it to know that it's just an aid, a tool, not a how to think and always be right or something like that, and to compare it to the things that its rivals, because its rivals are things like we're going to have a bunch of arguments and say I looked at all the arguments and they seem pretty good, so I'm going to call that an 80, um, which is also using fallible judgment, right? You've got squishy thinking there. It's not telling you exactly what to do. It's leaving room for creativity and disagreements and so on. So we're trying to take that unstructured, free-form thinking and put it into a better organization that makes it a bit less free-form and unstructured. So there's still plenty of room for creativity. It's just trying to make the use of creativity and judgment a bit more effective and a bit more organized.
Yep.
But it definitely doesn't like solve the problem of irrationality. Like, you can still get into debates with people and then they can be unreasonable, or you could be unreasonable even. Um, but it helps clarify that to some extent because it's a bit more organized. It should be a bit easier to see those errors and point them out in a clear way and so on. It gets rid of a few places that bias can hide,
Hmm.
because the deciding how many points to give to an argument and deciding what weighting to give each argument in the overall debate are two of the common places biases can hide because they're a bit arbitrary. They're very hard to error correct. It's hard to argue with someone and say, you scored that argument an 8, but it should only be a 7. It's hard to get a clear, decisive kind of conclusion about that because it's just really squishy and vague.
Yep.
So
It occurs. Oh, yep. Sorry.
go ahead.
It occurs to me like the clarity of goals is really important for judging other people's ideas. In that, if you don't know what problem they're solving, you have to actually conjecture about that at the same time to figure out whether what they're saying is good or not. That
Yes.
might be like even sometimes there's like general sort of problems, as in you know societal issue or something. But even then, if someone has outcomes that they haven't said that they're interested in, they haven't said at the beginning, um, you can end up spending a lot of wasted time just to get back to the point that they have some outcome they either didn't know about or was implicit.
Yeah, so a common technique for dealing with difficult debates and trying to get on the same page with people is to focus on the easy issues first, the ones that people are better at being objective about. And this is culture specific. It's related to what things our culture has knowledge about how to be objective about, which is things like measurements and facts and math and logic. When you get into those kinds of issues, people are better at reaching decisive conclusions. Actually, the things people can reach decisive conclusions about is approximately what people are good at being objective about. If they have trouble reaching decisive conclusions, that's an indication they're bad at being objective about it.
Yep.
Anyway, so you can have like a political debate, and it has all these difficult to argue about issues involving moral values, say. However, there are also some relevant facts about history and the current situation, and um, how many people are in that country, and how many of them are poor, and how many of them have so much money, and so on. And these facts have some relevance. Like, they don't tell you everything, they don't settle the issue, but they help inform the issue and give you some reference points that your arguments can mention. And if you can actually establish those facts and agree on them, it helps make the debate easier. It's a way to chip away at the problem by
Yep.
agreeing on some points that give you some of the picture. And a lot of debates, they can't get that far, actually. People in political debates will not agree on the facts and you get stuck. And at least it gives you some idea of why. Like, if you can't even do that, you probably shouldn't be trying to debate the moral issues with that person, because that's harder.
Hmm.
Anyways, yes, no does a similar thing. It chips away at the difficult problems by finding pieces that we can be clear and objective about, like specific binary goals and whether specific um, solutions actually achieve that goal or not. And you can take each of those individual judgments. Did this exact solution solve this exact goal? And make a judgment about that, and then expose that to criticism. And it's much more open to criticism than assigning something an 80 out of 100 weight. It's a lot more like a
Yep.
fact, where you can actually reach a decisive answer about whether this particular clear plan of action will achieve this particular clearly defined outcome that is specified with success or failure criteria. That's something I don't know if we mentioned much, but when you're formulating goals, you can specifically list criteria of if the X happens, if Y happens, if Z happens, that's success. If A or B happens, that's a failure.
Yeah. So um, it occurs to me that so two things. One, the first one was that uh, the way that we were structuring the criteria stuff yesterday about goals is probably good for doing fact stuff as well, in that like facts are theory laden, and people will, particularly when we have stuff like if people were talking about GDP, and particularly if they didn't have good understanding of economics, they might like agree on certain things within like for the purposes of one goal but not for another. And so by breaking them down like that, at the very least you could chip away at like which goals are appropriate to be discussing and which aren't as well, like sort of at the same time. It gives you a way to there's sort of some positive loops there. Um, the second thing was, and I guess this might be a bit of a question in general. Like I tend to be quite happy with myself, I guess, when I've had some idea over here, and then I learn more about the universe over here, and there's some compatibility there. Um, so, like the example in this case, um, which will make it way more concrete. So with like flux and this like new system of democracy type thing, they're like one of the ideas. So the with regards to like legislation or people putting forward ideas, um, like I don't think we should specify like much about. We shouldn't constrain people very much at all. But some of the things that I like, if we were going to constrain people, were um, like success fail criteria. So like explanation, prediction of outcome, success fail criteria, and then the actual policy itself. And I think these are not, they're implicit in all of the ideas that people want to like put into practice in society, but they're very rarely explicitly mentioned, which is a problem because sometimes it lets you change those goalposts later on. It lets you, you know, well, do all kinds of bad thinking habits. Um, anyway, so I guess as I'm like learning this, I yeah have this sort of like, I don't know, self-satisfaction type thing, which I'm not sure is necessarily the right thing to feel, but when these sort of synergies come together. So even though I've thought about it in like a much more constrained place, um, or much smaller sort of scope, um, yeah.
Yeah, goalposts are a problem. People usually don't want to specify them in advance. Actually, for the last couple of years, I've frequently asked people about their goals when they come to FI or when they start a conversation, and I've found that people really don't want to answer. And they also don't want to tell me their background knowledge, like what books they've read, how much popper they know. There's this weird thing, I mean, it seems weird to me, but I guess it's standard, it's normal, where they just want to jump into the specific topic and get rid of all the surrounding discussion that involves like what they're looking for in the discussion or what their background knowledge is, which is super relevant for me answering their questions to know like what I can refer to and they'll understand what I'm talking about. But they often don't even want to tell me that. I have theories about why they do this. I think it's social status related, and they're worried that I'm trying to judge their social status by their credentials and how much authority they
Mm.
have. And also with if you specify goals or goalposts in advance, it's you're exposing yourself to being wrong in a more clear way with less wiggle room to get out of it.
Yeah, you also, I mean, the other side of that is that you make it like far more obvious to yourself and others when you learn things, as in when you have a, if like, I guess people maybe worry, and this is one of the really bad things about politics, right? Is
You
that
just cut out.
we, oh, sorry, is this, oh,
I still can't
uh,
hear you.
uh, is this working again? Um, Discord seems to be
It
working.
must be my headphone because you're actually picking up on OBS. Let me switch earbuds.
Okay, yep.
Say something? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh,
Can
there
you
you
hear
go.
me?
Yeah, now I
Cool.
can.
So, I was just saying that, uh, yeah, that moving goals are, or specifying goals makes it obvious when you learn things, and there's these, like, which is a good thing. It's good to, learn that your goals weren't specific enough, or learn that they weren't the right thing, or that they actually, weren't your goals. Um, uh, One of the ways that we like punish people for doing this that I think is really bad in politics is when it's seen as a bad thing when a politician changes their mind. Um, Now, if they're, just saying two things to two different groups, that's bad. But if they're actually like, if they've learnt something, then that's good. Um, but it's seen as a bad thing.
Well,
Yeah.
so
Anyway.
it depends on what the politician is presenting himself as. They often present themselves as, I've already studied, I'm already educated, I've already figured out the right policies. These are the right policies. I'm running on the platform, I already know the answers, these are the answers, I will implement them. And then when
Yeah.
that kind of person changes their mind, um, it's quite problematic when they hide the fact that they changed their mind and continue with the same presentation of who they are. I already have all the answers. I already know everything. I'm not in a learning process. So when you combine those two things, it's actually really hypocritical and bad. If a politician actually ran on the platform, I'm a creative thinker who's learning as I go along, it would be a lot more possible for them to admit they changed their mind about something without getting flamed for it. But that's not a common politician mold.
I think it's not popular at the voting booth as such. Like there's an evolutionary force against people who, and well, that and most people who run under such a platform or have tried to are not very good at doing that anyway. So
Yeah,
maybe that's why it's not popular. I'm not sure, chicken and egg
those
sort of
both
thing, but
seem like factors that learning in real time while on the world stage under pressure is hard.
especially when
And
it's,
it's not what voters are expecting and looking for from like a strong authority figure.
yep, especially when they can't specialize in what problems like if you have 75,000 people who are, that's the size of an electorate in Australia roughly, who are, interested in your decisions, they're going to be talking about a vast array of topics. Um, and so the fact that politicians can't specialize on particular topics, except like, via like ministries or some of that, we do have some structures for that, which is good. But in general, like just a normal low level regular parliamentarian is, it's a really big job to try and do that. I
Yeah,
don't know
and
if
also
anyone.
if you look at people's role models for educated persons or authorities or whatever, it's teachers and parents. And most of them present themselves as I already have all the answers, rather than I'm going through a learning process.
Mm, yeah,
That's
it's a
what
yeah.
people are used to. Okay, backing up, you mentioned GDP. Briefly, are you familiar with it? Has a lot of problems. I don't know if you know
Yeah,
that.
so I know it has a lot of problems. I know there are ways of inflating it basically arbitrarily, or presenting it however you want. I haven't really looked into it that much. I've like read some
Yeah,
things in the past, but because
that's
I just
fine.
have a
Don't worry
flag
about
that
it.
it's bad. Yeah.
Yeah, just be aware it's not a very good measure. I wasn't sure if you're using it as that kind of
Yep.
example on purpose.
I just said
Okay,
it came to mind. Yep.
yeah, regarding moving goalposts, and you said that part of the advantage of specifying goalposts is you can be clearer about changing your mind and learning and stuff. Um, yeah, part of what it comes down to is whether people actually want error correction. Um, do they see that as a good thing or a bad thing? Are they trying to avoid it, or are they seeking it out? Um, a lot of people just don't want their errors to be found and exposed and corrected. They'd rather hide them, and partly because they have too many, so they're not going to become like they think it's like draining the ocean with a bucket, so it's pointless. So it's just pain and misery.
Mm.
Some of them want to do error correction, but only like secretly, so that they don't take a reputational hit.
It is very like humiliating sometimes, I guess. I don't think that's necessarily like the reason that humiliation is maybe associated with shame. Like that's just a social thing. It's not intrinsic. Um, anyway, I think it's important for yeah,
Yeah, I
as
don't see it that way. Partly, possibly because a lot of the early error correction that I experienced was chess moves, and there's a very strong culture there of objectivity, of like this is
mm,
actually a better move, and like learning what the better moves are helps you. Like it's not seen as shameful for young kids to make the wrong chess move and then learn that a different move was better. You're not It's not embarrassing that you're not a perfect chess player as a kid at all. Even for adults in general, like you're an amateur. You're not a top 100 in the world professional. Of course, you're not going to play the best moves. A lot of the fun is getting better at chess and learning some better moves and better strategies. So I spent a lot of time in a culture that was open to objective analysis of different people's ideas in the form of specific moves, and then trying to figure out which one was actually better and why. And people had actually changed their minds and agree that a different move that wasn't the one they initially presented was better. And a lot of times there's very clear answers, like this one actually loses a piece after a 5 move tactic. And sometimes it's a lot more judgment required because there's like long-term strategic factors and people can actually come away disagreeing and not reach a clear answer, but so it's hard, but a lot of times you can reach clear answers and change your mind and stuff.
I imagine though, in those like apparently somewhat ambiguous situations, if each player or each chess player was uh, tried to be clear about where they saw it going in the long term, the other person, even though they might not agree still, they could sort of at least say, "I see where you're going," or "I see why you're sort of the shape of what you're thinking there." Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and if they
That is
both did that for
common
each other,
that you can understand the other person's point, even if you think that it's not the most important factor. You can say, okay, I got it. Your idea is you want to attack the king, and you're going to play for that, and that is a strategy that makes sense in general. It's just not my preferred strategy in this particular position.
there's also just way more parochial stuff. Like one player most of the time does like those matches where each player has like a 5-minute timer, and the other player, plays on an unlimited timer or something like that, where
Oh yeah,
um,
that does
there
affect
could be.
what positions you want. Okay, so another thing you were mentioning was convergence, and that you like it when you find things that have like the same ideas in some other part of life. And it comes up again. And yeah, convergence is nice. Have you gotten to the parts in the choice where he talks about causes converge?
Um, no, I think so. Oh, I don't have a physical copy. That's not going to be easy. I think I've gotten up to chapter 8. I don't know what. I'm not sure if I've started reading that one. But I think it's only like a third of the way through the book. So um,
Okay.
there's an maybe unless maybe this is the intro to it sort of thing where he's talking about um like one of the most recent things that they talk about has been in terms of depth into the book was uh the benefits for uh, like people like the smaller firms who do manufacturing of the clothes and why they might also prefer the change um, in like the relationship that's being proposed in terms of the ordering and volumes and dyeing and etc. Um, I think I've read the story about the chapter that's the story about like that report.
Right.
So that might be the beginning of it.
Well, I'll just let you get to it. Um,
Cool.
anyways, regarding convergence, I was also going to mention that um, I like it too, and I've noticed it in, for example, on the Yes or No website, if you go to Ayn Rand quotes, I have some quotes I gathered from Rand's main books related to yes or no. You can see people like literally asking yes or no, and trying to get clear answers to clear questions. And the villains don't like to give decisive or clear answers or commit themselves to things. That's an ongoing theme. So there's a relationship there. And then similarly, you can find some precursor ideas in critical rationalism in Popper and Deutsch. And you can also find it in Goldratt, in particular in It's Not Luck. He talks about wanting decisive answers or decisive solutions instead of compromises, which is a TCS thing as well, is common preferences, not compromises. And
Yep.
he talks in It's Not Luck about a specific technique that I really liked. So you take a pro-con list, and then you throw away all of the pros, and then you go through the cons one by one and come up with a solution to every single one. And if you can't solve all of them, then you don't do it. And if you can solve all of them, then you proceed.
That's a Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that idea before, but it's very elegant.
Yeah,
It's also
it's
oh, sorry.
related to not acting on refuted ideas. You have to have a non-refuted idea. You have to deal with all the cons. You do have to be careful because there's different types of cons. You could call them decisive and non-decisive cons. There's cons you can put up with and cons that are deal breakers that mean you're going to fail at your goal.
Yeah, game
You,
breaking was the
yeah,
phrase that came to mind.
yeah, you have to solve all the actual important ones, and the other ones you don't actually have to solve. You just have to say, well, I can put up with this, so it's not really a big deal anyway. That's good enough.
Yep.
And if you want to solve it more than that, you're getting into optimization, like optional improvements instead of required for the goal improvements. Okay, so yes or no philosophy, we're talking about the general context, that it is a tool to make thinking easier and more objective. So it's designed to be an improvement on previous tools, but you still have to use judgment and creative thought and so on.
Yep.
And we're also like outlining what we went through. So degree arguments, what else we had? What to do with zero solutions and what to do with many solutions. And converting continuums to binary digital with breakpoints. You can also convert by formulating questions that have a yes or no answer. This is a different technique that's sort of different than breakpoint. So like if you're considering pets, the questions often relate to breakpoints. Like you could say, will this dog fit in my car? And that is actually related to a breakpoint on size.
Yep.
But you can also come up with questions without figuring out exactly what breakpoint or continuum they relate to, like, will my friends like it?
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's sort of, I mean, it's almost too much work to even try and figure out what breakpoints are associated with that, but it's definitely, there's like a lot of implicit or background goals sort of that it invokes, but it's very easy to ask the question.
Right, so there's a lot of questions you can come up with. Some of them follow standard patterns that have yes or no answers. So like figuring out yes or no question. So we didn't do that yet, but so what else did we already cover? Focus, did I have focus? Okay, focus, excess capacity, and background goals, which is related to focus. You can only focus on a few main things that you're trying to optimize or be picky about. And then most of the stuff has to be pretty easy. Because you can't do too many things at once. Oh yeah, so decisive arguments have priority over degree arguments. We can use techniques to always get enough decisive arguments, so we don't actually need degree arguments as a backup. As a starting point though, or for people who disagree with me, just being able to use more decisive arguments more of the time is a benefit, even if the whole system doesn't thoroughly work. You can use it in an incremental way and take the thinking you're already doing and just keep your degree stuff as a backup and find more opportunities for decisive arguments, which is a thing people like are weirdly not looking for because they know that most of them accept and know that decisive arguments exist and they like them. They're like, oh, it contradicts the evidence or it has an internal logical contradiction. Therefore it's wrong, therefore we've actually reached a conclusion and that was really useful. They see those arguments as really powerful and good, but they seem to have kind of given up on finding other ones. other ways to be decisive and like expanding the scope of what they can be decisive about. And there's something weird about that they're not looking for. Maybe there's a few more opportunities that we've missed. Because like I understand that they don't think you can use it for everything. Like that's quite a leap. But trying to find a few more ways to use it seems like an area they should be researching, but I'm not aware that anyone is.
Yeah, particularly the idea of a technique to like come up with more decisive or decisive questions seems like why wouldn't that be? Yeah, it's sort of puzzling that people, I think it's related to the intuitions people had and what you were talking about before about like philosophers in the past having inklings of this idea, but almost like unable to take it to this step.
Yeah, it's partly related to induction.
Ironically, I think if like similar to mathematical induction, you could probably create an argument, like an inductive argument, um, where essentially like we can start with a decisive question and we have a technique to invent more decisive questions that are relevant for our goals, and we can do that at any midpoint. Therefore, from the starting point of being able to ask a single decisive question, we should be able to solve every problem solely on the basis of decisive questions.
I don't think I totally followed that.
The technique for creating more decisive questions is your step from like k to k plus 1 or n to n plus 1 in like a mathematical
Oh,
inductive proof.
okay.
And
Yeah.
so, yes,
Yeah, so some of this stuff is related to non-coercion. Are you familiar with the avoiding coercion method I developed?
no.
Okay, well, it is a recursive problem-solving method, which is kind of related to what you were talking about, where you can keep reusing it over and over. Um, so it iterates with itself, and then the nice property is it gets easier with repeated use. Basically, ambition scales down if you keep using it over and over. You get an easier problem. You recognize that you're
Okay.
not going to get a highly ambitious solution. You're stuck on too many things, so
This
you
feels a lot or very related to paths forward as well, then. Sort of in a similar way, in that if you run into a disagreement, then you can like have some more specific sort of like subset or like a smaller problem essentially to disagree about, and then go down until you solve that and then start coming back up.
yeah, so this I developed this when I was trying to understand David's claim that common preferences are always possible. Um, not just theoretically possible, not just possible with the right knowledge, but possible in real time with actual resource constraints, time constraints, knowledge constraints. So I was trying to come up with a way to understand that and make it more concrete. And so I developed a method. I'm going to give you a link, by the way, in tutoring. This is a post that gathers many other posts that are all epistemology related, and you can find things here like multiple incompatible unrefuted conjectures, or we can always act on non-criticized ideas, all problems are soluble. So there's various relevant things here. Critical preferences and strong arguments, by the way, was some of the first stuff I wrote about yes or no philosophy. It was criticizing Popper's critical preferences, which are you sort of weigh all the critical arguments and form a preference based on which ones survive criticism better.
Yeah, okay.
So
So,
that's
yeah,
very much the standard view.
that sounds like what sort of Deutsch might have been a bit stronger in his belief in BOI, but it sounds very much like that. Um,
Yeah,
the, you know,
Deutsch has defended critical preferences. Yeah, yeah. My understanding is he didn't really see my point of criticizing them. Anyway, I tried to bring it up. This is Yeah, in 2010, I tried to bring it up on criticalrationalism.net, and none of the Popperians like understood my point at all, and were not interested, which was pretty sad. The lack of interest in particular, and the lack of wanting to debate it or anything.
Yeah, particularly, I mean, there's a certain irony there. Yeah.
It's people don't live up to the thinkers they admire. Yeah, the average quality of the fan is not similar to the thinker's quality. In some ways, it's just like a numbers game. Like there aren't that many great thinkers.
Hmm.
So, right, it's not a problem with Popperians. It's just there are no large groups that are full of a bunch of smart people. In Patio 11's words, there is no hidden reserve of smart people somewhere. This applies to like colleges or science labs or the government or, take your pick.
Yeah,
The
Silicon
CIA,
Valley and
the
startup culture.
NSA, Harvard, it doesn't matter. None of them have a hidden reserve of smart people. To the extent that they have smart people, it is basically mostly publicly visible in some manner. Like they write books or whatever. I mean, if it's like the CIA, then yeah, some of the stuff is confidential, but we know the CIA does stuff, so we know they have like some smart people, but it's not a hidden reserve of like thousands of super smart people or anything.
Hmm.
Same thing with like Google, even if we don't know exactly who does what, like clearly they have some smart people, but it's not millions of them or anything. There's most of their people are not as good as the ones who actually make a lot of the best stuff work. The whole idea of like the 10x or 100x programmer or rockstar or whatever. Okay, anyways, critical preferences, or no, avoiding coercion. So the method is so you're trying to solve a problem, and the context here is you want to take action. So we're trying to deal with the problem of time limits, because if you get rid of the time limits and you get rid of action and it's just abstract curiosity, then you just keep thinking about it until you figure out the answer. And if you don't have the answer, you just keep trying more at whatever pace you want. Like there's no real problem there. You just say, I don't know, and that's fine, and I'm going to work on it when I feel like it. So the difficulty comes up when we actually want to take actions in our lives and we have time limits. Make sense?
Yes, yep.
Okay, so then in that context, um, we run into problems like it's hard to tell if A or B is correct. We're not sure which one's better or right or whatever. It's hard to resolve the disagreement between these two contradicting ideas. And this contradiction between these two ideas is relevant to what actions we should take, what goals we should have in our life, like some actual practical consequences. It's not a purely abstract issue. Um, and so the difficulty is, in principle, you can figure it out. Like A is right, B is right, or actually they're both wrong and something else is right, whatever. Like there's some objective truth of the matter, and there's nothing that makes it impossible to figure out. However, we might not figure it out in the next 10 years. There's no way to get a guarantee that we're going to figure out the answer soon. So, how do you act in life when your actions depend on this issue that you don't have the answer to? This is a hard problem, an important problem. So my solution is you ask a question. Given that I don't know the answer to A versus B, what should I do right now? So you treat the conflict itself, the fact that you don't know it, as a given that both sides of the conflict can accept. Like you can think of it as two people or as warring factions of your personality or something. Like you can have the A faction and the B faction, and you don't want to have this like internal fight, and you don't want to resolve this internal fight or fight with a different person by picking a winner and a loser. Right? It's irrational to just take sides, pick a winner, decide who should rule, and suppress
Hmm.
the other side when you actually haven't reached the truth yet. It's
Yep.
fine to pick a winner by consent, by actually convincing them because you've come up with good enough arguments that they're convinced. But if you're not there yet, then you have to find a way to proceed that is reasonable from both perspectives. It has to be reasonable from the perspective of the pro A side and from the pro B side. So what can you do that both factions can agree to? And that's the kind of question I'm asking. Given that we haven't resolved this disagreement, what should we do? And whatever you come up with as an answer to that should be reasonable from both perspectives, A and B.
Yeah, okay. So I have
You got to come up with
attempted
something
to
that's neutral to the conflict and act on that.
so I came up with a prediction for this in regards to IBDD. I don't think it's very good, but in terms of I don't expect it to be very good revisiting it after a few years here. But um, but yeah, so two sides, both where essentially they're wrong in some way, but they're willing to cooperate. Um, and basically, I think it's focus on creating new options. Like that's the only solution that I saw. I guess, yeah. And I don't think I've
Right.
had any other thoughts since then.
Yeah, new options is definitely correct because we're not just going to act on A or act on B. Neither of those is satisfactory, so we definitely need a new option. Right. So this question helps us figure out the new option. It's guiding us to come up with something that both sides can agree on. Like given we don't know, what can we do? We can stall for time. We can look for something that has low downsides if we're wrong. Like suppose that if we act on the B option, and we're wrong, there's very low downside. Then both sides might be able to agree. As long as we don't know the answer, we'll act on the low risk one. So you can come up with things like that, like low risk options. What was the other one I said? I forgot what it was.
Um, there was the side effects. No, that was yeah. I'm not sure. Well, there was like we could try B, or we could try and come up with a new solution that. Um,
Oh, stall for time.
oh, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's an important option. You can find ways to put off the decision and think about it more. Okay, and you
Yep.
can find something to do that you can try to find something pretty neutral, which is related to low risk. Something that neither side strongly objects to. A lot of the times with these problems, like A strongly objects to B, and B strongly objects to A. You have to find something different.
Hmm. Arguably, if they don't strongly object to each other, there's either probably some common ground, or that they're like orthogonal, and we could do both at once.
Yeah. There's definitely a selection effect where the ones where they strongly object to each other are the harder ones, so those get attention.
Yep, yep. I mean, that sort of makes sense as well, in that we expect the solutions to be harder to come up with, but we should need to spend more time on them.
Right. Okay, so anyways, you have various options about how to try to come up with something, but so then the next question is what if you fail? What if you got stuck again? Right? So this gave us a new opportunity. So we had option 1 was solve A versus B. Option 2 is solve neutral option given A versus B. So we stopped trying to solve A versus B and we try to come up with something else. So now we have two different problems we could solve, and solving either one is okay for non-coercion, for acting, for finding a way forward that none of the parts of ourselves or none of the factions or whatever strongly disagree with and object to.
So, the second one there, that like options that have like low downsides or we can stalling for time, they both come under 2 there. Like those are the
Yeah,
neutral options.
these are
Yep.
all 4-2. Okay, and then what if we get stuck again? Then it's basically, given we don't have a solution to 1 or 2, what should we do? If we get stuck again, given no solution to 1 to 3, what should we do? Given so this is an infinitely repeating process if we want.
Okay. So the question we were so solve a neutral option given A versus B versus a neutral option for A and B is unknown. Is that okay? Okay, no, no. It's not doing that. It's saying
Given that.
uh, given that we can't solve a neutral option
So
or
here we're
yeah,
assume A
like
versus B is unknown. Don't try to
yeah.
solve it. What can we do?
Oh, okay, yeah. Yep.
Then what if we get stuck on that? Well, now we have a third option. Given we don't have a solution to 1 or 2, what should we do? What if we get stuck on that? Given 1 to 3 are all unsolved, what should we do? What if we get stuck on that, given 1 to 4? So each time you're limiting the scope of the discussion or of the search for solutions because you're making
So
more things off limit. So each time limits scope of solution search space makes more things off limits.
I can see people might make the objection that this feels arbitrary, but I imagine that as soon as you apply it to some concrete things, it becomes a lot more obvious the nature of these limits.
Yeah. Yeah, so the basic thing that happens is it gets easier each time because you get to the point like given A B C D E F G, what should we do? And it's like probably just stop trying and to cooperate with each other, for example. Just do anything really easy because there's almost no options left.
So in like one of the things like the neutral option, so we're actually proposing a new solution as part of that. So if it was like, given we can't go to Disneyland or Hawaii, what should we do? Oh, let's go to Colorado. Oh, we can't go there as well. So given that we can't go to Disneyland, Hawaii, and Colorado, what should we do? Let's go down the road for an ice cream. And it's like, oh, okay, then we're good. But if we couldn't go down the road for an ice cream because it's the middle of winter, what should we do? And yeah, and it becomes I can totally see that now, um, because it's not that the neutral option is anything like a compromise or like a fixed point. There's in essence like an infinite number of neutral options, and as we restrict the set like this, the set of like possible things, or as we add constraints is probably a better way to put it. Um, there's always more restricted, more tighter in scope new ideas we can come up with in an infinitely recursive way because we're creative. It's not that there is ever a limit to this. Um, if you had some algorithm for spitting out meaningless ideas, sort of like random genetic code or something, then you would expect this to be a very, very long process and a bit pointless. But given that we're creative, it doesn't make that's not what we should expect this time. It makes a lot more sense to expect this not to end up going that deeply. Um, I imagine in the scheme of things, yeah.
Okay, so this tends to lead, the more you get stuck on the more levels, to leaving each other alone, aborting the project, stop trying to cooperate, it's too hard. Um, if you can't find a way to cooperate for mutual benefit, just don't cooperate. Um,
Yep.
what are the main exceptions to that? They're when you have some sort of obligations to each other. The two factions don't have the option to leave each other alone for whatever reason. They're stuck together. And
Yep.
in that case, you look at why are we stuck together? What are the obligations? Who owes who what? What is the minimal thing we can do? How do we like respect each other's rights and just do the minimal? And reasonable people ought to be able to agree on something along those lines, even if they have a lot of other raging disagreements.
Yep.
And then the other case is what if it's an internal conflict in one person? So again, you can't leave each other alone.
Mm.
So you have to come up with something that is acceptable to both sides. Um, you just
So
have to
this is
actually do a good job of problem solving when it's yourself that you're dealing with.
this is the sort of thing when in like when Goldrat and Goldrat talk about or sorry, Efrat's surname isn't Goldrat, but when they talk about uh conflicts, particularly like conflicts in people, um that's the same sort of thing here, like conflicting desires. Um and yeah, I mean I definitely like I think it makes a lot more sense to sort of posit that within a person, like contradictions in our like desires or feelings or goals or things are like they're always resolvable, uh, like via methods like, you know, having integrity, sort of thing. In that we get a lot better at those, the better we are at these other skills. Um, I guess it's also, I mean, besides some arbitrary things like a lion appears, I can't think of too many cases where there's like a real time limit where you might be super conflicted about something. Um, yeah, but I can see for two different people, it makes a lot more sense in terms like obviously you can.
Time limits come up, like for example, you get a job offer with a deadline,
Oh yeah, yeah, and maybe there's yeah,
and you could be
it's not your
conflicted
perfect
about
job.
whether to take it. Like you have to move to take it, and part of you wants to move there, and part of you doesn't. Anyways,
Yeah,
with internal conflicts, you have some major advantages. You have common ground and shared values between the two factions inherently because they're part of the same person, so they have a lot of the same ideas. They agree on a lot of things. This makes it easier to negotiate and to be on the same side instead of be enemies. Whereas with other people, it can be a bit harder to be allies instead of enemies, but you have the option to part ways, so that is a saving grace. If you can't find common ground with someone, you can leave them alone.
yeah,
And of course, there's the people who can't find the common ground of leaving each other alone. Even the pro-violence people, that's hard. Then you need a military or whatever.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's the basic method. Yeah, I linked you. Well, I linked you the index page, but also I'll link the article. This particular one. I think at least one or more of the articles is about this method in particular.
On the 1595 post.
Yeah, yeah. Like this looks relevant at a glance, probably. I see also avoiding coercion. Yeah. I just looked at the title. We can always act on non-criticized ideas. So, right, that was part of why I brought this up, is it's related to acting on non-refuted ideas. It's
When
being
we say
able,
non-criticized, it's not just like in the absence of criticism. It's like ideas that we particularly agree on and we agree don't have any strong like criticisms that are relevant at that point.
yeah, by non-criticized I meant non-refuted, like we don't know a decisive reason that it won't work for its goal.
Yep.
So, right, so when you have the A versus B conflict, um, A has a criticism of B and B has a criticism of A. They both claim that the other one is not going to work, and um, you're unable to resolve this, which means that you don't know that A or B will work. Neither of them is actually a good idea at this time because neither of them was able to address the criticism and resolve the issues. They're both in some way inadequate. This is also a common theme with my decisive argument stuff is when you have a bunch of contradicting things. Right, so we talked about when you have many ideas that are just all candidate solutions and you can just pick whichever one you want because they're all fine. But also there's the issue of like, what if we have many ideas and they contradict each other? Um, what do we do? And the short answer, besides this solution, is if they disagree with each other and none of them are able to guide you to figure out the right answer to the disagreement, then they're all wrong. None of them actually know the answer. They're not good enough. You can convert from many contradicting ideas to something of a blank slate by saying they all were inadequate. So we're going to reject all of them for now, pending
Yep.
some sort of improvement. So that's an important technique.
Yep. And that I sort of yeah, I mean that's it feels a lot like yeah, uh if something is not specific enough about like its claim about reality, um or how it solves a problem, if it's not specific enough to refute the competitors, then how is it specific enough to actually solve the problem? And
Yeah.
that's just mutually
In
applied
particular,
across
the
the board.
competitor is saying some reason it won't work, and if it's not able to answer that, then rip.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it either has to, yeah, so it's yeah, obviously the other ideas might have an answer. They might refute the refutation, which, yeah, and so on.
Okay, yeah, so that's some of the background context on how to resolve arguments and debates and criticism and so on. That helps make decisive answers more possible instead of getting stuck with compromises. Okay, so we were here. These are things we already talked about. And we just talked about this one.
I might quickly go to the bathroom. Back in a tick. Okay, back.
Okay, so another part of yes no is converting positive arguments to negative arguments. This isn't all that hard. So positive arguments say something good about an idea. To get a negative argument, you criticize the rivals for lacking the merit.
Okay, so positive
Merit,
argument
not
says,
metric.
did I? Oh, sorry.
Or that,
Yeah, that
yeah,
was
it's the virtue, the positive good point, whatever it is. Um, if this idea is good for having it, then other ideas are bad for lacking it, so you can easily convert to a negative argument.
so like this thing will, like, or surgery will remove your cancer, and this other thing, like, is not going to remove your cancer, therefore it's bad. Don't do that other thing.
Yeah. The point of
Yep.
arguments is to differentiate between different ideas. If you see them this way, as relating to the competition between ideas rather than relating to a single idea, then it's easy to see that a differentiation can be viewed in a positive light, it helps the one on the left, or a negative light, it hurts the one on the right. Like, if you're differentiating two ideas, one is gaining and one is losing, so you can emphasize the negative or the positive.
Um,
Um,
to disambiguate, is there another concept about negative arguments, or is this the thing that people have always talked about, or it's consistent with what it's always meant?
I think this is consistent with.
Okay, I wasn't sure if, like, I think there's um yeah, that, like, Popper used, or the phrase has sort of been used in that context, I feel like, but I can't put my finger on anything.
Yeah, there's
Um,
some Popper stuff related to this.
okay, yep.
A lot of that is about. It's about why negative arguments are more fundamental and important because you can refute a universal law with a singular piece of evidence. You cannot prove a universal law even with infinitely many singular pieces of evidence. There's an
Yep.
asymmetry there between proof and refutation.
That's the context I've heard it in, yeah.
Yeah, so the reason I was interested in the conversion is because people are like, well, I have all these positive arguments and I think they have good points, and how are they compatible with your system? My answer is you can convert them. And if you know that you can convert them, you can also skip that step if it's non-problematic. If no one's debating you, if everyone just accepts it, you can skip steps. It's not that big a deal. Positive arguments work okay as an approximation for negative arguments. However, if you're having a hard time, if you're getting stuck, the way to be more rigorous is to convert everything to negative arguments and use only negative arguments.
Yep.
So a lot of the key point here, which is very Popperian, is about arguments differentiating rivals, like why is this one better than that one or worse than that one, rather than arguments building up a single idea in isolation out of context without comparing it to any other ideas. And when you use that model, when you just look at this one, I have this idea and like I've come up with 7 reasons it's good, and you're not comparing it to anything else, then you get in trouble. That approach to thinking does not work well.
It occurs to me a whole bunch of people would probably say at this point something about the null hypothesis. Now, I don't think that's ever really very good because it's just turning an implicit or common sense or like whatever they believe the default is. Like you still need to actually know what a default is to have something like that, as opposed to if you had no idea about like a new phenomenon or something, and it was we were considering the first idea. Um, yeah. Um,
Yeah, I mean, if you want to argue and boost up your idea relative to the null hypothesis, that doesn't mean that your idea is super great relative to the idea that Joe suggested, right? You've only
hmm.
compared it to the null hypothesis, and even if you view it as like gaining status or something relative to the null hypothesis, it doesn't mean your idea is high status relative to other ideas.
Yep. So, as a consequence of that as well, like, because I don't think I've read anything about like the null hypothesis, particularly in terms of BOI or stuff. There's sort of maybe some implicit stuff in the criticisms of psychology. Um, but uh, so if your idea is like better than the null hypothesis, sort of thing, um, it's not actually an indication that it's true in any way, because it's I think the null hypothesis is about like the fact that something like a phenomena exists. So it's not really testing an explanation. It's just sort of like testing for an explanation, I guess.
Null hypothesis is kind of context dependent, what people see as null.
Hmm.
It's clearer in some cases than others. Like, there's some studies where the null hypothesis is there's no effect here, and the issue is just like, does this effect exist or not? And so you got a pretty clear one. Whereas, like, if the issue is capitalism versus the null hypothesis, that's a lot harder to figure out what the null hypothesis is. What's the default you would be comparing capitalism to?
Yeah, I mean, sort of just thinking about classical liberalism, I think there'd be plenty of people who would argue that like their idea of capitalism is sort of the null hypothesis in terms of like natural rights and things like that. Um, Particularly when you get into stuff like coercion or whatever else. Um, but yeah, I don't think you would be able to. I don't think people, if there were two sides to a pro or arguing about capitalism, I don't think they'd be able to agree on a null hypothesis anyway.
Yeah, I'd be more inclined to say that some sort of state of nature thing was the null hypothesis for political organization, like not having political organization. But it's not very interesting to compare to that because basically all sides agree that that's bad. Um,
Yep.
so that the
So,
interesting competition is between different potential social structures rather than anarchy.
well, it's sort of interesting you mentioned that. I think there's like actually like there's theories of international politics or international diplomacy or that sort of thing, but like one of the competing theories that I don't think is actually taken very seriously is the default state is anarchy. Like essentially presume that we don't start with political entities like on that scale. And it's weird that the other ones sort of do start from that point. I don't know. Anyway, I haven't looked at that for a long time, so I might not be representing that right, but I know one of the theories is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So about the positive degree arguments, I think part of what they're doing is they're assuming that their arguments have reach. So they will compare their idea to X and Y, and they'll say, here's why my idea is better than X and Y. And then they'll assume that means their idea is probably better than Z. And this is very dangerous because certainly some arguments have reach, and some of the reasons your idea is good or that rivals in general are bad might apply to Z or might apply to many ideas, but you can't safely assume about any particular idea that just, that you have reach that makes your idea better than that. You should actually check. Did any of your arguments actually apply to Z? Because a lot of the ways people brainstorm ideas is non-randomly. So even if you're better than 99% of ideas, like from the set of possible ideas or something, and you've proven that or whatever, most of the ideas people are actually suggesting in conversations might be from the ideas that you have not already refuted or shown your superiority to. Right? There's going to be a major selection bias where they're trying to present ideas that your arguments didn't already deal with.
Yep. So this feels like people are very reluctant to change the degreeness of their argument, sort of thing, in that because to acknowledge that it doesn't apply in these other cases means that it has to be scaled back. Now, I mean, arguably, there's like in this case like this, if you're involving other ideas, there's an infinite number of Zs. So, like, of course, I don't want to do that because at that point your numbers scale back to zero. Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of selective attention, like they've built up there, so they think it's good, and then you propose Z, and you're like, I've carefully designed Z so it has every virtue your idea has, and it's not refuted by every negative argument that you've brought up, right? So I should instantly have the exact same number of points for Z. It should have the same support because it's survived all the arguments in just the same way as their idea. But because it's new or because they're biased or whatever, they often don't want to give it equal points.
well, if there was some alternative you had beforehand, like some W, and there were any points for W, and like W had was also not able to criticize Z, this new idea you've created, then like Z is almost particularly if W and the other person's idea disagree, like Z must have more points, like exclusively more points in
You
that case.
cut out just a second.
Oh, um,
Try again.
I'm still my Discord thing is going green. Yeah, hey, is this working again?
My AirPod is not working. Oh, it disconnected. Try again.
Test. Boop, boop, boop.
Okay, yeah. AirPod fixed.
Yeah, like if there was some argument where you had an idea earlier and then they had their idea and you designed this new one that was not refuted by either of the previous arguments, but the previous arguments disagreed, then it must have like exclusively more points or equal than or greater, technically, I guess. But yeah,
Oh,
so
you're talking about the A versus B conflict, and then you make C that didn't get refuted by A or B. Yeah, that
and
should be seen in a positive way. Yeah.
so we have more understanding about why it's positive, but it's really fatal for anyone who's operating on degree arguments because the second anyone comes up with new stuff, it means their ideas that must be wrong. So I can see a huge
Yeah.
reluctance to acknowledge that.
Often in practice, the Z that I'll propose right away is an ad hoc modification of their idea on purpose, because I'm
Yep.
showing that their idea is variable under the constraints that they've specified, the particular positive and negative arguments that they've actually named. And they're just like, well, it's dumb and ad hoc, so they don't want to give it equal points or whatever. But what I want them to do is specify an actual argument that criticizes or refutes it. And often the reason I want them to do this is I think that they will have a hard time refuting the ad hoc modification without accidentally revealing a flaw in their original.
Yep. Yep. As a bonus, it's a example of like not being hard to vary, provided that it's sort of like consistent. So there's that on the side.
Okay, so my other notes about yes, no were that you can learn the habit or techniques for formulating things in more binary ways. And we talked a lot about converting factors like continuums to binary with breakpoints and stuff. You can also just make a lot of stuff that's binary in the first place. You can get good at asking binary questions or looking at binary traits, as well as small digital, but so there's a lot of room for skill there to think in a more binary way in the first place and need fewer conversions. So I think the compatibility and the possibility of doing conversions, um, it helps explain why the old views worked as approximations, and it helps people transition. But you don't have to rely on conversions in the long term, or at least you can reduce how often you're using them.
Yep. Do you think that all conversions are sort of like come out of like it's possible to eliminate all conversions?
No, probably not, because I think there's just continuums in reality like length.
Yeah, okay.
So then we're going to want a breakpoint to figure out what lengths matter and um, condense the
Well,
continuum by mapping many points to one.
also like error in measurements and things like that. I was thinking about in Goldratt if you take two measurements of a building and they disagree, but also any two measurements are going to disagree to some extent because of error. And I don't think they actually bring that up in the chapter. Um, but yeah, but I can see any analog or um, well, yeah, if it's a discrete system but with sufficient number of uh, elements, like percentage points. Yep.
Yeah, so breakpoints, another way to think of them is many to one mappings. So it's reducing the number of things we have to think about because we're grouping many things together. And the way we're doing that with breakpoints is we're finding ranges of continuums, and then we take a whole range and map it to a single value. Yeah, the breakpoints specify the starts and ends of ranges.
Mm. People are probably very familiar with this with like formatting Excel spreadsheets, like with conditional formatting, where that's a really obvious thing where it's like if it's less than 40, it's red, and if it's between 40 and 80, then it's orange, and above 80 is green or something like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and then other thing I had. So part of what I've done is I've moved some of the problem of judgment and so on away from the arguments and the solutions into the goals instead. So partly I've improved the problem, but partly I've moved it.
So that was like moving judgments from being in the problems to being in the goals.
Being in the
That was the
solutions, the goals.
being in the solutions. Okay. Oh, into the solutions to the goals.
So,
Oh, as in,
right,
okay,
instead
so
of
yeah.
making a judgment call about which solution is better, we make a judgment call about which compound goal do we want to solve. That's a movement of judgment more than it's not like getting rid of it. But we've gotten rid of it from one place, but we still have judgment in a different place instead.
Yep. No, I can see how that. Yep.
Right. So
And
that
that's like,
raises the question of how to do that judgment well. And some of the answers are one, you can do a decision chart or do the whole yes/no procedure about which goal should I follow, which goal should I choose. So you can recurse the problem-solving method relating to a step within the problem-solving method, and you can do that without limit. And
the
then
decision chart.
go ahead.
Decision chart is the thing we had in numbers last time.
Yeah, right here.
Yep. Yep, yep. Sorry, I'm a little behind the stream. I'm just catching myself up.
Okay, and then again, I want to some extent, get away from continuums. So you can look for decisive factors for choosing between goals. Like, which are the really important factors that I want to focus on? What do I value the most? What's a deal breaker? And try to focus on bottlenecks and key issues and things that are really important to you, and focus your attention on those and make your decision that way. You want to have most issues you're just like, this is good enough. And then a few issues you're more picky. And you want to figure out which issues those should be, and that's how you decide between goals primarily is finding some key issue that actually makes a qualitative difference for you. Looking for qualitative rather than quantitative differences. Once it's down to just quantitative differences and optimizing, it's generally easier and less important anyways.
Yep.
Right, so you look for key problems and downsides that you really want to avoid, and like, what would I be unable to live with or unsatisfied with, or what do I really want or what do I really not want? And
Yep. It occurs
use
to me
those to help guide you.
if someone was having like trouble coming up with breakpoints, that's probably a sign that it's not a decisive factor, or there's not particular decisive factors there. And like if say there were like two key things and one of them was somewhat continuous, like it means that it must be less, like anything where you can't do that for is less important than things where you can, because you know more about those things that you care about. Like it's easier to make decisive factor, or to come up with decisive factors if you need to
Yeah, I
for a
think
key
there's
goal.
other that can happen. I think there's other ways people will have trouble finding breakpoints. Some of it will improve with practice. Like, some things it's hard to find a clear breakpoint, but you know that like a lot more makes a big difference. But it's not
Mm.
any particular amount. So someone might not know how they deal with that. They're like, I don't know where the breakpoint is. I just know if one has way more than the other, that's better. Um, so you can learn how to integrate that into yes, no thinking and deal with it. Um, so you could specify like a moving breakpoint, like x plus 500 is a breakpoint without specifying hard numbers.
Hmm.
Because the problem with hard numbers is if you just have breakpoints every 500, and then you have something that the actual value is 300, then the proper breakpoint to compare between two specific ideas and one is 300, then the proper breakpoint is 800. No, the issue is not whether it crossed the 500 mark, but whether it's 500 above this one. So you can actually just hard code the 800 as a criterion, and you can specify it as 500 more than solution A offers is a breakpoint. If anything can actually hit that breakpoint, then that would be a significant advantage over solution A.
Yeah.
Or you can more flexibly specify that like a 500 advantage actually matters on this particular thing.
Particularly, I guess if there was if you had an error rate on like one of the measurements of 500 or something, then you've got there's a clear difference once you get past the error.
Yeah, did we talk about margins of errors for breakpoints?
No.
Okay, I think I had one other thing. Oh yeah, so another thing when you're trying to deal with your goals and your decision charts is look for things you can rule out. Like, so instead of trying to find factors that help you say this one's a bit better or this one's a bit worse, like just actually look for decisive factors that are going to let you just cross this one off the list and say I'm not doing this one. And those are more useful and let you actually make clearer progress. Like, you can have thousands of degree arguments and never get a clear answer. But if you have like 30 things you're trying to choose from, which is on the high side, you would you'd need at most 29 decisive arguments to get to a single answer. So it puts more of a cap on how many things you have to figure out.
Yeah, sorry, could you say that last part of again?
Yeah, so if you're using degree arguments, you could have 5,000 arguments and never get an answer, never eliminate anything. If you're using decisive arguments, and you have 30 things, which is kind of high, you would still need at most 29 arguments. It's a lot more approachable, and you can actually get there eventually. It puts
Yep.
a bit of
It,
a limit on how much work you need, because each argument is actually making progress.
yep. You can always choose two of them, and you can always make an argument between those two, etc. Yep.
Yeah, now there is the further issue that whatever your argument is, the arguments themselves are open to criticism, and you can get into endless back and forth criticism over anything. This is actually one of the main reasons people, I think, view yes no as impossible and aren't looking for it, is because they're sort of used to this endless debate where everyone could keep trying to get the last word and there's no way to ever resolve it. People just keep making arguments, and so you need techniques for actually resolving critical arguments back and forth. Or you can get stuck because you try to criticize some goal or some solution or whatever, and then they try to criticize your criticism, and then you criticize back, and then they criticize back, and you need some way to deal with that. Or you're not going to get an actual decisive solution. You're just going to have to say at the end of the day, like, I thought Joe's case was stronger than Bill's case, so I'm going to call the solution refuted.
So this is different from the idea of just mutually contradicting each other or mutually criticizing each other, in that like we actually have, like, it's
Yeah, you can
because
keep
this is,
adding new things to a chain. So, like, I say X, and then you say why X is wrong, so yours is Y, and then I say why Y is wrong, so that's X1, and then you say why X1 is wrong, so that's Y1, and I say why Y1 is wrong, so that's X2, and we keep going, and each thing um, has the potential to chain through the entire thing and make my original thing win. Because I refuted your most recent thing, which means my previous thing is now valid again, which means your next thing is invalid, which means my next thing's valid, and so on. So yeah,
yep, and there's
you can have you can have like the entire argument being the stakes every single time someone's adding a new link to the thing.
yep, and we can't predict whether a chain will end for any particular side, or if it, like, will end in the near future. So having techniques to get away from that is, well, at the very least, practical for making decisions in real life.
Yeah, and furthermore, it is trivial to continue the chain infinitely in bad faith. You can
Yeah, yep.
always come up with a new stupid argument why the other person's wrong.
Yep. And then, yeah, well, that's, I guess, the other thing is that, like, we could have sort of the zigzag going down, but we could also have one person just going across, where, so, I say X, you refute it, I say X1, which is just a slightly modified X, but has like a arbitrarily different refutation.
Yeah, that's true
And then
too. You don't have to chain. You can just stay at level one or so, and just
yeah,
keep making up more variants. So it's a very similar problem to making up variants of the original idea or the original criticism to dodge the issue.
yep,
So how you deal with that is a large topic. Part Okay, so libraries of criticism, patterns of error. The short story is you need criticisms with reach, with generality, and you save them, which is the concept of a library. So we're saving up all these ideas for later reuse. And what you do is you find patterns in the arguments your critic is making. So you stop trying to refute things one by one. If you try to refute one by one, you are fucked. There are infinite things they could say. So what you have to do is refute categories of ideas. Or in other words, refute ideas that match certain patterns. So you
so
find that they're doing certain recurring errors, and then you point out that error, and then when they repeat it, you don't have to make a new argument. That's the basic idea of how you deal with this, like, throwing infinite bad arguments problem.
so yeah, so if it was, yeah, the hard to vary is one of those sort of examples, where if someone else's idea is easy to vary, and then it's trivial to see how they could do this infinite recursion. Um, but you can refute, yeah. anything that they build off that um, all at once.
Yeah. So that's how you deal with things like bad faith or throwing infinite ideas out. There's
Uh,
also the problem of long arguments that are not in bad faith. Um, and the answer is everything they say is either one, covered in your library, or two, new to you and worth thinking about. This is a very important point that comes up with Paths Forward because people are worried that they're going to waste their time dealing with these energetic critics.
yep.
And so the point is basically everything that someone says should either be one, already covered, or two, new and therefore worth consideration.
Um, so I just writing down that there's always a criticism, or yeah. So I had this sort of question come to mind, which is there always a criticism with reach for any bad faith argument? And I think that it's sort of reasonable, at least on a practical point, to say that there is, particularly because if someone does that and you like, there's multiple ways to do like bad faith arguments, but if you can refute a class of them with some criticism with reach, then eventually that person has to come up with like a new way of doing bad faith arguments, which
Yes.
is in itself a hard problem. So it's they will self limit at that point. There's no way they can like I mean unless they're literally just doing it to try and piss you off for fun or something, and they're actually good thinkers otherwise. But if they were good thinkers, why would they be spending their time like that?
Yeah, so the bigger your library gets, the more you have reusable ideas, the harder it is to come up with new things. And this limits new criticisms and things to deal with and so on. And limits the time investment and so on. And if they're actually coming up with new things, the bigger your library is, the more you're going to be happy when someone actually says something new. You're like, wow, I finally have a new thing to add in my library. I haven't had a new one for a while. My library can now get more powerful.
Yep.
So like additions are valuable. A lot of people don't see that because they have a small library and they're not really keeping track of it, and they like delete half of it every year at random. So then they
Yeah.
don't care about additions. But if you're actually trying to learn things and build up your knowledge, then um, you should not view it as like there's too much to know, so adding things to my knowledge is pointless. Like that's not really an attitude compatible with the quest of building up your knowledge. You can say some stuff is off topic and you're not going to deal with it, and that's fine. You just have to be open to arguments that you're wrong and that it's actually relevant. But you don't have to learn everything. You can say it's out of bounds for the things you're working on, and you might be right.
Yep. Or it's then there's like an onus for someone else to say no, this is actually inbounds and you're mistaken about that. But
Yeah,
that's a
they just
problem
have to
which
give
is
a reason.
definitely in your but that's something that's always in your bounds. Um, like as in it's a fundamental flaw to say that like the issue of your boundaries for a particular problem is outside the boundaries of that problem.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are some of my main ideas about how to deal with long argument chains, because it's people are worried that stuff's not going to resolve because of counter criticism and counter criticism and so on. So we talked about how to deal with both bad faith arguments and good faith arguments where they're actually um, realistically able to add things to your knowledge base, which is valuable. There's also like the well-meaning people who just aren't familiar with your library, in which
Mhm.
case you want your library to be like publicly readable on the internet, preferably, and you can refer people to it and be like, you know, the last 7 things you said were not new to me, so I'm going to ignore you until you like read 7 of my articles or something. And
Um,
that's a
so
reasonable way forward.
I just went over to your site and or curie.us and checked, and there's I think yeah 2350 is the last post number. Um, have you like I feel like that's at least proportional to the size of your library, roughly speaking. Um, have you met anyone with a comparable like sized library? In that
No,
when I've pointed people to your site, like
but
your like prolific writing is very obvious very quickly.
yeah, the blog is really not representative though. This ebooks page will give you more info. So the FI archive through the end of 2018 is 75,000 pages.
Yeah, wow.
The
I guess there's
BOI
probably a
archive
lot.
is 18,000 pages.
I
TCS.
imagine a lot of that could be compressed with quotations, but it's yeah,
Right, so maybe we should divide by two for quotes, maybe even three. It's still a lot of pages. Like a
it's
lot of
massive. Yeah,
pages, right? Right, so TCS 25,000, Fabric 51,000, ARR 9,000, and there's some other things, but we're in the ballpark of 200,000 pages.
I don't know how to like that's A4 pages, I presume, or legal pages. I don't know how to even yeah gauge that.
Oh, yeah, these are pages in whatever font size Justin used that looked reasonable in a PDF.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I know some things about word counts, and email counts and things, but yeah, this is a good enough rough metric. I did check the other day though that my writing project currently, I have 400,000 words in the Ulysses folder.
This is the one that you've been working on recently.
Yeah,
Okay, wow, yeah.
yeah. A year or two ago, I started writing a lot more stuff that I wasn't sharing. I've been building up that. I was working on politics for a while, and I wrote. I have about 75,000 unpublished words for that, but I published essays liberalism. I published this summary article that said most of what I wanted to say, and then I stopped working on it for the time being. But yeah, like harmony of interest was the hardest part to write, so I wrote approximately 20 different draft essays about that in order to try it in different ways.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out more organized ways to structure my writing and stuff because I started with a fairly chaotic, free-form, intuitive approach and just learned lots of things.
You mean
And
particularly like the big structure, like you've got a blog with, but just things numbered 1 through 2000 is not very structured.
yeah. Anyways, like writing, so I got very good at writing like an article, like that length, whereas like a book is harder to write, longer, more structure. And I think a lot of the way people do that is very, very inefficient. It's very hard for them, and they struggle through it anyways because they really want to be an author. And
Mm.
um, so regarding like overreaching and only do things that are easy, meaning efficient, meaning resource efficient or cheap or lower error rate, I'm trying to figure out how to power up and build up to being able to make bigger and harder things while staying efficient and not just muddling through something that's way too hard for me. So I'm trying to
Yep.
bridge the gap into more structured things and doing many drafts of the same thing, writing about it in different ways, is a way to harness being able to write like short articles easily into being able to make a high quality thing because I just write 20 short articles as a way to um, it helps me work towards higher quality.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyway, yeah, I don't know anyone with comparable stuff. That actually amusingly came up on Discord with uh, Starshine, Sunshine, Shadow Starshine, I think was his name, something like that. Um, because he challenged me on that point. It came up in passing for some reason, and he's like, "I probably have as much or more,
Sundance, maybe?
maybe."
I
I
can't
think he left
see.
the server. No, it's not Sundance.
Oh, okay. No, okay, okay. That was the only similar name I could see. But yeah, there's no under S
Yeah.
at least, I
Anyway, yeah, he
think.
challenged me, and then I like linked to my like archives, and then he didn't want to talk about it anymore, and it didn't acknowledge that he'd said it. He didn't want to like back down or. But yeah, he just assumed that I was like boasting, so he boasted too. That guy, like a large percentage of his conversation is verbal. He's like a YouTuber. He actually doesn't have
Yeah,
much
okay.
writing at all. And the people who do it verbally, like, they never have the same quantity as, like, hundreds of thousands of pages. That's just not as realistic for discussions that are synchronous and you have to, like, remember everything because you don't have written archives to reread and so on. Like, the structured
Mm.
approach of writing really lets you build up, like, much larger corpuses. Like, there's a reason that the printing press and writing and so on were so important to human civilization compared to oral traditions, verbal traditions.
Yep, that makes sense.
Anyway, yeah, so you have to see, like, developing a good library as achievable and, like, value it so that you actually want to talk to people and deal with criticism and new ideas. Instead of saying, oh, there's too many new ideas to deal with, I give up. You have to have some confidence in the possibility of finding patterns so that it's not overwhelming.
Yes, yep. Yeah, patterns, yeah. Well, without that, yeah, everything would be, nothing would be reusable, essentially.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. You need reusable knowledge with reach, and then it makes it more approachable to deal with all the ideas.
yep.
Okay, and then there was something else we were going to get back to that I wrote down somewhere around here. I think you made a headline. Oh, margins of error for breakpoints. Yeah, it was easier to find on yours. Okay, that one's not that complicated, but when you find breakpoints in continuums, it's often hard to pick an exact value. And this is completely fine. So you can say it's like the breakpoint is 100 plus or minus 20. Right? Makes sense?
Yep.
So what
Well,
you do with this
unless you
in
had a,
general,
oh, sorry, I was just going to say, unless you had like an exact value in the mathematical sense, it makes sense that you
yeah,
wouldn't
sure.
be able to, yeah.
Sometimes you can have an exact value, but often you're going to have a hard time picking the exact breakpoint. Most breakpoints don't readily give you an exact value, which is fine. So you say 100 plus or minus 20, there seems to be a qualitative change somewhere around there. The primary way you deal with this is you just use solutions that are not in the gray area. They're not in the margin of error. Usually there's just plenty of values that don't run into the margin of error. You can have a generous margin of error and then just avoid it. Just stay away from it. There's no reason to deal with it.
Yep. And
Sometimes,
we've, oh, sorry, yep.
occasionally, it's important and you want to deal with it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if there are gray areas, then we have some of the problems of the nature that we talked about before, in that we've, like a lot of those techniques we could apply to reduce the gray areas, at least around particular points there.
Yeah, so there's a lot you can do. If it's actually important, if you have a reason that being more precise about this margin of error matters, you can investigate it, you can research it, and look into it in more detail. And then when you do that, you're going to reduce the error bars. And there is no particular limit on your ability to look into it further and then reduce the uncertainty and the margin of error and whatever. And so then you can have more exact breakpoints to the extent that you need them and they're actually relevant. But don't optimize unless it's actually important.
Yep.
So I think that covers yes, no pretty well. I might have forgotten some main idea, but I think we went through most of it.
Yep. I can't think of anything that particularly feels missing. Um, though I sort of wouldn't expect to either.
We're past 9, by the way. Do you want to go to 10 roughly?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. so if we do, I'm definitely gonna be sort of fairly drained at the end, I think. Um, I was gonna, yeah, bring that up as I know I asked for a longer one today because of the stuff we
Yeah,
talked about at the beginning, but I feel
maybe
like that was maybe
9:30.
yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yep. Um, that's probably good. We can finish off anything or I mean, there's yeah.
Okay, well, um, you can ask questions, or we could go to your journal stuff. I had written down some notes about that.
Yeah, well, I was interested in getting some feedback on that anyway, in that if I'm going to be doing it, so I feel like in terms of the time stuff, that's pretty straightforward. Like the background for this, by the way. So I've listened to um your uh your podcast on goal introspection, journaling, like daily or weekly. And I think there's one other one that maybe was related. Um, that might have been I listened to one yesterday about sense of life. I think that had some other stuff in it. Um, but yeah, anyway, so I think I've listened to 3 or 4 podcasts about that have touched on this stuff at least. Um, and I haven't listened to How to Learn Philosophy, I think, because that was a longer one. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
just went through and added things in order to the list, to the thing.
I just saw the title and thought it might be relevant.
Yeah. It is actually it's like the next one on my uh on the thing. Yeah, I missed sense of life, learning and practicing while driving the other weekend. But yeah. Anyway, so that's sort of background of where I'm at in terms of thinking about doing journaling. Um, there was a page before this, and then there was a little bit after it, which was I just had one idea that did come to me while I was so one thing I tend to do is like either listening to podcasts or reading books or things is I'll do a lot of like pacing and like internal monologuing about the thing. Um, like, and I'm not sure how common it is to internally monologue about things as opposed to I can't speak fast enough to do it. I've sort of tried to do it like and record myself, but
I
I
think it's
can
common. For example, people have a conversation that has some sort of social stresses or conflict or something, and then they will replay it in their head a bunch and think about over what they could have said and what they could have done differently, and like so they're trying to analyze. I think having like a voice in your head and talking to yourself or monologuing as well is a common way to think.
oh certainly like yeah, particularly if you're trying to think about something. Um, so I'm like the type of monologuing I was particularly thinking about was stuff that you would like you could if you were to say it, it could be like a podcast on a topic. Like when I'm running through these things, I'm not. It's obviously hard to figure out what mistakes I make doing it because
Yeah, I do
it's not
that
recorded. But
internally sometimes.
yeah.
I have to
Anyway, I
stop
find
myself though sometimes, or I'll lose it. I won't be able to write it down later. I have to stop
yes,
and
yeah.
start writing.
Um, but it's like the lowest quality way of trying to re-express an idea to like understand it better and get the like the implicit bits explicit. Um, and then yeah, and then like voice would be the next step up, and then writing down for your own notes, like or journaling or things would be the next step up from that sort of, and so on and so on. Um, but yeah, I've been thinking a bit about discussions and stuff. Just because so A that I've been having them with other people. Like the conversation with friends, there was like a really good 2 hours in that, in the top left of the journal thing. Um, which yeah, I thought like really helped me in my understanding of the stuff I was talking about, but then was also helpful for the other person. Um, yeah, anyway, I've just sort of I guess I've just been thinking about it a bunch. But yeah, so in terms of I thought this was like it was pretty decent and not too much of an issue in terms of writing stuff down. Like it's a bit slower than typing. But I find that it's much easier to have paper and write things down while you're like watching things or stuff like that. Like it's, um, I'm not sure exactly why I prefer it to
Yeah,
typing. But
I
yeah,
don't. I don't handwrite at all, basically, if I can avoid it. I'll just take notes by typing. But
uh,
it's fine if it works for you.
One thing that did occur to me was what do you call it? The like my cat came and sat on my lap, and I can do that. I can write physically at the same time, but I can't type at the same time. I've got like a TV out in the living room, which I um, yeah, usually use more at night, and was watching Yes No on. So it works better in that situation, whereas like here, like I've got, plenty of monitors and stuff, and that's where I'd probably more likely type stuff. Um, but yeah, anyway, I guess if there was any like, I don't know, I guess with something like this, like one of the main techniques you talked about was where was it? The like writing down what you actually did throughout the day, so you can measure that against your actual goals. I thought yesterday was pretty good. There are some other days that I have that are not as good. Um, but um, but I sort of presume that you didn't see anything that was like grossly incorrect with it, like a real. Um,
Yeah, I keep track of stuff in a spreadsheet lately. Here's a little example. There are a bunch more columns, including how much sleep I got
oh yeah, yep. Um,
and exercise.
yeah. Um, that makes sense. Um, okay, so this is yeah. So we're looking at sort of like a bit of a fragment with words, particularly. I mean, I imagine that. Um, yeah, I'm trying to just write down everything at this point because, and yeah, I mean, my dominant measurement instead of something like words is percentage FI. Because it's a bit all over the place at the moment. But yeah,
Yeah. These words are specifically it says non-discussion. It's also sort of like forward progress words, rather than all words.
yeah,
Like
okay, yep,
random debates with people I don't count because I've done those for a long time and I'm trying to focus a bit more on making intellectual progress in a clearer way. I
yep.
found,
That-
yeah, debates started getting a bit repetitive on certain issues. So, but that's just for me, my way.
Yeah.
Anyway, spreadsheets are convenient for this stuff because like you can add it up, for example, or get averages.
Well, that I did find that where like the first page is essentially pretty much the same thing as the second page. There's some other stuff like it's mixed in with other notes, and then about a third of the way down, I've got like align goals, and then I remembered what you said about writing down exactly what you did. Um, but it's in essence the same sort of thing, and I had to rewrite it so that I could like list the time and the percentage and stuff again, so that then I could rewrite it again for the third time as a summary with everything added up. So spreadsheet is definitely a better, like this being the third time. Um, Spreadsheet is definitely a better option for that. Avoids a lot of just wasted space and rewriting. Um, the other ideas are, easier to do.
Okay, so when I was reading your journal stuff, a few notes. First one was about people getting annoyed about criticizing small errors. My
Yeah,
my theory is that they're assuming it's a non-decisive criticism, and on top of that, they tend to assume it's like a small degree argument rather than a large degree argument. Um, but this assumption is problematic because when I make a criticism or bring something up, I'm doing it because I think it's actually relevant in some way. Like it actually matters to some. It's actually capable of refuting something. Um, it's not just a thing that can be glossed over and ignored, but they tend to assume that it is.
yeah,
And they tend not to ask why, which is hard because you don't want to preemptively say everything because there's way too many things you could say.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
hard when they don't interact and ask questions. That's a general issue that comes up where you can't include all of the information, and if they're not giving you feedback about which additional information they need, then you can't tailor it to them. And you're in the same position as writing a one size fits all book, and it's not really a discussion.
yeah, yeah. And that's the hardest type of book you can write. Um, yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess. yeah, I mean, I'm not particularly worried about me doing it. I am like, I guess, generally interested at like getting better at figuring out how to convince people of like changing their ideas around this stuff. But I'm not sure I know enough about it to really start that.
Yeah, that's hard. And a lot of people who have tried have failed, not just with convincing other people, but with convincing themselves and not quitting and not giving up and so on. Those kinds of things are major risks, um, real concerns.
Hmm.
Have some understanding of like what the dangers are that cause people to quit and give up and so on. So you had a note. Some goals have reached question mark. Yes, the background context goals, for example, that we are talking about, those have reached
Yep.
to many problems. They're reused over many different problems. That's why they're background context, is because they keep coming up over and over. For my
Yep.
solution to thousands of different things, I want to not die.
Yeah.
So that's
Yep.
a goal with reach.
So it is the case that there's background goals with outreach too, though, right? Like that are parochial stuff, like my mother's fish has to be happy with it or something. But I guess they're not really interesting. And you can just ask arbitrary questions
Well,
about them.
if you're
No,
applying that to many different decisions in your life, then it would have reach in your life. It's parochial in some ways, but you're actually using that as an important criterion for many of your decisions. So even though it's parochial, you're
yeah,
applying it to many things. So it does have some reach.
yeah, okay. So yeah, so I'd only thought of the reach in terms of like lots of people have this. So efficiency was the one where I was like, this is a goal that's special beyond any. So it's not an implicit goal relative to our problem, and lots and lots of people share it for like a very general reason. Yeah, okay, it's getting a bit more like I'm seeing the texture of yeah different background goals now.
Yeah, if you're reusing it, then you think it has reach, even if your reasoning is dumb. You're giving it reach
Hmm.
in your life. You're
Yeah,
actually applying it across many contexts.
it's hard within the context of your life. It's hard to vary. Um,
Yeah, apparently
so
for you, it's hard to get rid of that goal because you're under pressure.
yeah.
There's often social pressure with those things. Okay, then inspiration. This one's important. I wrote down some questions about it. So inspiration's important to manage. Like, how should it be handled? It has value. It can fade. What should you do while it's present? Like, what should you do as a urgent priority while you still have inspiration? How can you best get value from it? What makes it last longer or shorter? What leads to failure, disappointment, giving up? Are there different dangers? Um, oh yeah. Are there different dangers for abrupt failures versus gradual declines? Like maybe we should be categorizing the dangers for the ones that cause sudden catastrophe versus slow fading. That might be a useful categorization. Another question, what prevents other people from getting inspired, and then how might those factors have some relevance to you? So I think there's stuff to think about there. Do you have any initial thoughts?
Um, Mostly the initial thought is that I haven't thought about this, and I don't know, like, as in I haven't thought any of these questions before, really. Um, or maybe the one thing that I have thought about particularly is like what should be done while it's present, and then what makes it last longer or shorter is maybe it. Um,
So what did you think about doing while it's present?
so uh, it depends a little bit on the inspiration. Like sometimes the inspiration is because of like an idea, so writing down the idea becomes really, really important. Um, and that's any idea that I think of mine is like particularly good. Um, like as in where I've like created knowledge that I would think that fewer people would be able to do so. I've always tried to prioritize like that because I recognize like it's too easy to forget, and it's too valuable to forget, sort of thing. So I always try to write stuff down when in those
Yeah.
contexts. Um, yeah, usually though, I mean, I think most of the time, I'm trying to think of situations that I'd describe as like feeling inspired that aren't to do with ideas. Like, I don't really feel, I mean, I guess maybe there's minor stuff with like climb this wall or something, like some action-based inspiration. Like, but that sort of feels like more mob mentality type stuff that I don't know. Well, actually, there was one like thing that probably sort of fits this, where there was the 2013 staff protests or staff cut protests type thing at Sydney Uni, where uh, basically there were budget cuts and there was going to be some schools that were either rolled up into other schools or things like that. Like political economy was going to just be rolled up into economics, I think. Um, the so I was like a staff member at the time and had shown some interest in some of the schools that were going to be um, shut down. Just a IT staff member, nothing special. Um, and I dropped out as well. So I participated in this, and like there was this protest. It was like the biggest protest in like 30 years or something like that on an Australian uni campus. Um, Went up to the place where the university senate was meant to be meeting, where of course they weren't meeting there that day. And um, there's a few chants outside the building and stuff, but basically, we've done the walk, and I was sitting back with a friend of mine, Dylan, a Canadian guy who was like self-funding a law degree. And I remember thinking at the beginning about there was, I don't even know if that was students, but there were people there with like anti-police slogans and stuff on like big red socialist alternative or alliance type stuff. That's the group we have in Australia at least. Um, and I was standing back at this point with him because it had been 15 minutes or so since everyone had gotten there. A lot of people had left, and there was this like so I wasn't feeling particularly inspired at that point. There was maybe earlier, and someone yelled out something like "Storm the Senate," and they like most of the people at the standing, the I don't know, 30 odd people or so, um they're pushed against the line of say 10 police. um, and it was like, in terms of just we talked about like a drop off in inspiration, like a really sudden thing. And that moment was like a really sudden loss of all of it, all inspiration at anything about that, and it was just this overwhelming feeling of like, this is never going to work. That was stupid, um, sort of thing. So that's the only other. That's I guess the main experience that I'd say is not. But I haven't really felt anything like that. I think particularly recently. Yeah.
People get inspired in a way with dancing. Like they start sort of awkward and self-conscious, and then they get into it and they get flow, and that's a sort of
Mm.
inspiration, and then they find it easier and comfortable. And then they lose it
Yep.
when they stop, and then it's hard again the next day.
Yep. That makes sense.
They also use
Um,
alcohol for that.
I did want to talk about just because I think as about 10 minutes or so ago, or 5 minutes, like I think I got a sense of a persistent error that I've been making. When I read like "Re Best Philosopher," people get mad because they hear that as a social status thing. Um,
Oh,
so and this, oh yep,
I'm just scrolling down. That's all.
this uh like reminds me of like yeah, there was the criticism of the talk that I gave in 2018 in Bratislava about where I think it was, anyway, on one of the slides where I mentioned BOI, or the slide where I mentioned BOI, I described it as like the best book ever written. And a non on FI, they sort of questioned that. Um, and I think there's sort of like a sort of persistent error in that, like I'm still using the idea as somewhat of a social signal of like you should like sort of treat this more seriously because of the source sort of thing. Um, Not as in like, I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know. I like, I want to say it for potentially the wrong reasons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, social is extremely insidious, powerful everywhere. You when you say like still using or something, you shouldn't expect to have fixed that or anything.
No,
It's a
I'm happy that
very hard problem.
um like now, particularly in terms of after starting to read the choice, like I'm happy that I've sort of even like last night, I was doing it like in a way that was wrong that I wasn't realizing was wrong, like writing, this stuff. It might not necessarily be all wrong, but there's definitely like, still errors there, social stuff, errors. So I see there's a Atlas Shrugged quote.
Yeah, that's about being the best, not about social status. Well, it's related.
But yeah, is there any particular? I mean, I guess there's the stuff in the Puppet Strings um, blog post, but
Oh, yeah, yeah, I was just gonna ask if you'd seen my recent posts about this,
no, I
about
haven't seen recent.
social.
Oh, and there was I think there was a subscribe star thing on it recently. Yeah, yeah. Well, that was Gold Rat
Oh, yeah, probably.
was the most recent one. Yep.
But one, two, three, four relevant posts right here. Three have social in the name as one is second-handedness.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And that's like December last year-ish. January. Yep.
Yeah, the big idea here that I came up with at some point was that social dynamics are the core of static memes.
Yeah. Okay.
This is also related here.
Yep.
So yeah, there's static memes as like an abstract concept, and um the way a static society works, I think, is that there are some core ideas that have a lot of reach for suppressing critical thinking. Um, so kind of like the bully as the mafia enforcers or whatever. And then a lot of other ideas don't do their own enforcing. It's not like every individual idea in the static society knows how to suppress criticism. It's like there's some general purpose libraries, and all the other ideas are calling those libraries or relying on that service or whatever.
Yep. Sort of just
So
hanging
in
off it.
that context, then there's the question of what are the core ideas that actually like ruin critical thinking.
They
And
should be easier to address than
yeah, my
trying to
my
get
theory is that social status is like the key idea there.
Okay. I so there was this idea I was playing with that was quite a it was sort of at the core of the first sort of uh, uh sort of crisis of identity type thing where I right before I reached out to you, which I think so I think on this, yeah, so that was me on whatever date, um, and I started working on this thing. I don't know. I'm less attached to it now, but I don't know when to come back to it or look at it again. Um, is it here somewhere?
I wanted to mention briefly that the static meme theory, being social memes, is more speculative than some of my ideas. It's not fully developed.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure if I can find this thing quickly or where I put it. Oh, it might be in Drive actually. Um, anyway, yeah, it was about. I don't even know if it's well, yeah, sort of any good. Um, I haven't revisited it because I was. Um, don't know because I know I made it as a tree. Anyway, I'm gonna have to find it. We can address it later.
Okay.
It's and we did say another half hour, and it's over that now. So
Yeah, do you want to end
um,
here?
yeah, that's probably a good point. I've got a lot
Okay.
to look at and read. Cool. Okay. Thanks again for today. See you next week.
Yep. Bye.
We keep the same schedule, by the way.
Yeah, although did you see my PMs?
Uh, if Oh yeah, like this morning
I'm
or
busy on
earlier.
one of the days.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
we should yeah move the day. I'll talk to you over there though.
Okay,
Cool.
bye.
Thanks.